Hi, everybody, and welcome to day 17 of my 30-day Facebook Live Language Facilitation Challenge. Today's topic is a really important one. Today I'm talking about sensory integration, intuition, and language facilitation, and how those things all go together. So in this video today, I'm going to tell you about what sensory integration is and how most professionals identify sensory integration issues. I'm also going to tell you why sensory integration and language facilitation go hand in hand. I'm also going to tell you 5 questions that you can intuitively ask yourself about your child to help you get to the root of their sensory integration issues. And I'm also going to tell you how to know when the sensory behavior you're observing in your child is a problem. And then I'm also going to let you know 2 basic guidelines if you have to replace a sensory behavior. So ways to choose good replacement behaviors for sensory issues. And I see Brianne's here. Thanks for joining me, Brianne. I'm a little earlier in my live today than I have been, hoping to reach some families maybe internationally. And I know that it's going to be available for all of you on the replay right after I'm done here on my page and also on the YouTube channel, if you want to catch up on any of the 30-day lives. So thank you for joining me whenever you're watching, if you're live like Brianne, and then also if you jump in here on the replay. So just in case you don't know me or you haven't seen any of my videos yet, my name is Marcy Melzer, and I am an intuitive speech-language pathologist. And I help parents teach their children how to use the words they need to share their wisdom with the world. And I work with families who have late-talking children for all different kinds of reasons, anywhere from phonological problems or articulation problems through nonverbal autism. And I've been able to help the families that I work with, my Waves of Communication parent coaching program. I've been able to help these parents turn their kids' nonverbal behaviors into verbal language starting within the first week. And this 30-day challenge is all about educating as many parents as I can about why you are the best language facilitators and how to use your clinicians as resources so that you can see changes faster and more efficiently and more naturally than any kind of therapist can do in a clinical setting. So I'm really happy that you're here to view this video today about sensory integration because it is a super important issue. And like I said, the first thing that I'm going to talk about is what is sensory integration. And basically, to break it down to, dynamic or just definition, it is your body's ability to integrate the information that you perceive from your senses. So any of the senses that you use to perceive things, that's what sensory integration is. And when we talk about issues with sensory integration, we talk about processing problems. So what happens is when a body's ability to process the information it takes in through its senses is skewed or not normal or in some way infringed, then that's going to affect your overall sensory system. And your senses, of course, are vision, hearing, taste, smell, touch, and then, I always like the whole intuition as a sense as well. So that 6th sense of what people talk about, that intuition, I think that that's really good too. My cat's starting to talk to me. Maybe she's using her intuition. Anyway, if you hear her in the background, she just wants attention. So, all right. That's what sensory integration is, and how professionals identify sensory integration problems is through the behaviors that your child displays. So most of the time it involves checklists or many questions that you're answered while someone else is filling out a checklist, all about your child's preferences, their avoidances, the behaviors that they do repeatedly, things that don't seem typical for you, and primarily an evaluator is going to be looking for trends. They're going to be looking for kids who like to experience the same kind of sensory input repeatedly or avoid the same kind of sensory input repeatedly. And when those trends start to tick off, similar things on those checklists that they do, then that's when the evaluator is going to be able to identify if it's a sensory issue in whatever category of questions that they're asking you. So if you have been told that your child has sensory issues or sensory integration issues or sensory processing issues, that fundamentally is a problem with your child's ability to integrate what they are perceiving, what they hear, what they see, what they taste, what they smell, what they touch, or whatever information is coming in even intuitively for them. So that's how a professional is going to identify sensory issues. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk to you about is why sensory integration and language facilitation and language impairment or late talking come into play often together. And that is because many children with sensory issues are also nonverbal. So, and many kids who are late talking often have sensory issues. So whether it's the chicken before the egg or the egg before the chicken, a lot of times children, and they can't exist without each other. There are, of course, late talking children who don't have sensory issues, and there are, of course, children with sensory issues who don't have late talking. But many late talkers are also demonstrating sensory issues, and vice versa. So that's why they go hand in hand, and that's why it was important for me to talk about sensory issues with you as part of my 30-day challenge. All right, so the next thing that is a way that sensory issues and language and late talking go hand in hand is that both children who are experiencing sensory integration issues and children who are late talking are using behaviors to communicate those things. So a late talker isn't using words to be able to communicate their wants, so they're going to be using things like taking you places or pointing or using grunting or screaming. And a child with sensory issues who isn't tolerating sensory input like loud noises, bright lights, big crowds, a lot of energy from a lot of people around them, they may scream also. And that is actually also a communication behavior, because what we need to understand as language facilitation parents is that every behavior we see our child do or hear them say or sounds they make are all attempts at communication, whether the child is intentionally intending to communicate or not. So what's important with both late talking and sensory issues is that we are looking at all of the behaviors that we see as a form of communication. And then the next thing is that that late talkers and kids with sensory issues have often together is one of their sensory systems isn't working as well as the others. And so they are using an alternative sensory system to compensate for that. So a child who is late talking is going to be using visual means or nonverbal auditory or taking you there or picture systems or gestures for communicating. A child who doesn't tolerate or doesn't hear well is going to want to focus in on visual things. Or a child whose ears are very sensitive may avoid auditory input if they're highly sensitive. So the thing is, you're going to see different kinds of other sensory systems using. So if a child, is hiding, they may not also tolerate loud, bright lights, if they don't tolerate loud noises, or if they don't tolerate large energy, in large groups of people, they may, tend to be more withdrawn and use other systems for things like that. So I see Brianna's here and Joshua's here and a few more people popped in. Thank you so much for joining me today on my live. Today we're talking about sensory integration, intuition, and language facilitation. And I just got done talking about some ways that language facilitation and sensory integration issues go hand in hand. And like I said, they're very commonly overlapping in children. All right, now comes the interesting part of this video where I'm going to tell you 5 questions for you to intuitively ask about your child's sensory behaviors. I'm going to call these the communication behaviors that a child is using because of their sensory input system. And so these are the questions that you're going to ask yourself, your intuition, when you observe your child's behavior to help you get to the root of what those sensory issues are, like the cause of them or why those behaviors are existing. And that's actually the first question that you want to ask yourself. It seems a little crazy, but when you see a behavior that seems unnatural to you or is curious even to you, perhaps your child is banging on their head, perhaps your child is lining things up, perhaps your child is spinning things or rocking or watching the same video over and over again, or licking the walls or doing some other kind of behavior that you might think is bizarre. The first question you should ask yourself is, why is my child doing that? What benefit do they have from doing that behavior? Because no one's going to do any behavior, nobody, no human being is going to do any behavior unless they have some intrinsic, internal benefit from that behavior. So the first question you ask your child, yourself, is, why is my child doing that behavior? And you may come up with answers because you know your child better than others that, you could share with another professional or whatever. So that's the first question. The second question is, how does that sensory behavior make my child feel? How does it make their body feel? How does it make their head feel? How does it make their arms feel? How does it make their gut feel? How does that sensory behavior, and even if that sensory behavior is eating food, because taste is a sense, and think about, why is my child smelling that? What benefit could they have, and how does that make them feel when they smell it? If they like smelling it but you don't like smelling it, does that make them feel happy? Does that make them feel whatever? So how does it make them physiologically feel, and how does it make them emotionally feel, that behavior that they're doing? And then the next question that you can ask yourself when you observe your child doing a behavior, a sensory behavior, is that behavior solving a problem for my child? Outside of just enjoying it, the benefit that they might be getting is actually that it's solving a problem. So if they're experiencing pain from ear pressure and they're banging their head and it's distracting them from the pain, it's solving a problem. If they are screaming and when the TV is too loud and you turn off the TV when they scream, that's solving a problem for them. If they are hiding and running away when the environment is too busy, is that solving a problem for them? Are they just avoiding because they don't like it, or is that behavior actually solving a problem? Because remember, nobody's going to do any behavior unless it benefits them somehow. And so if you can figure out what that problem is that they're solving, that's a big, big answer for you to be able to get to the root of why they're doing this behavior and how you can help them solve that problem in a way that might be, systemic. If it's a diet issue, if it's, because a lot of these sensory issues are solved by things like diet and experience and language. So that's the third question, is this behavior solving a problem? The fourth question is is this behavior, because all behavior is some kind of a communication, is this kind of communication, sensory behavior, something that a child is using to communicate with you? Like, when the TV's too loud, I'm going to scream, so you turn it down. Or is this an internal communication? Like, if I bang my head, the pain will stop. If I bang my head, the pain will stop. Or if I go and hide in this corner, then maybe nobody will talk to me and I won't have to pull out my language words that I don't like. Or, maybe it's I need to run because I'm feeling very anxious in this closed environment where I'm having to sit still in my classroom, and I need to run so that I can do it. Or am I twiddling with a substance, or pushing my hands or wringing my hands to bide my time while I have to wait for something? Because sometimes we do things, we all have sensory behaviors. People who twirl their hair, people who pop gum, people who have to listen to music when they study, people who have to have it quiet when they study. All of those things, that's a form of communication sometimes that we use within ourselves to help keep us regulated and to help us tolerate what we have to do. I'm focusing, so I'm twirling my hair. I don't even realize it, but for some reason that skill helps me to focus. And everybody has things like that. And that's what, you have to understand too is, what is that communicating? Is it something that you need to respond to, like the scream for the TV, or get me out of here because it's too busy? Or is it something that a child just kind of needs as a coping mechanism to help them focus, or to help them be able to overcome other kinds of sensory issues like loud noises or sitting in a classroom or things like that? And then the last question that you want to ask yourself intuitively when you observe your child is, what triggered this behavior? Why is my child licking the wall again? But what is it that triggered that? What caused my child to want to start to lick the wall? What caused my child to want to start to wring their hands, or to run, or to jump all the time on the trampoline? What's causing my child to feel that way and need whatever perceiving that they're seeking out by doing the behavior that they're doing? So those are 5 questions that you can intuitively ask yourself to come up with the root of that sensory behavior. And then once you decide the root of it, the next step for you is to decide if that behavior is a problem or if it is acceptable. So, for example, twirling your hair while you're working at school isn't necessarily a problem, because here's a few criteria to help you identify if, like, a self-injurious behavior, something like that, is a problem. So here's the 3, actually I have 3 issues. And the first one is, obviously, is it harmful to the child? So any kind of self-injurious behavior, scratching, hitting, banging their head on other things, using, instruments to stick in orifices, or, that kind of stuff. Anything that's going to injure you, running out into the street, those are problem behaviors that you need to modify. And then the second thing that is a problem, of course, with a behavior is if that behavior hurts other people. So if your child is inclined to throw things or drop things off of tall things to watch them fall, and they decide to want to drop the dog or the hamster or their little sister, things like that, you definitely want to stop any behavior, of course, if it's injuring anyone else. And then the other problem with a sensory behavior is if that sensory behavior as a coping mechanism or alternative or whatever is actually perpetuating the underlying problem. And this happens with language because sometimes kids have sensory issues because they're frustrated because they don't hear, or they're frustrated because they just get so anxious by people not understanding them, that they get stuck in gestures, and they show sensory behaviors like screaming, and because that screaming worked for them to get you to stop, to turn down the loud TV, or to remove them from an uncomfortable situation, or stop you from intervening with them when they scream as a mechanism and you respond to that screaming, that obviously is a behavior that's perpetuating a problem. It's not necessarily harming the child or you, besides your hearing if it's a high-pitched one, but that's an example of a child who's using a behavior, a sensory behavior, to communicate a concern, and it's perpetuating their problem. So in that case, you would want to facilitate language to replace that screaming behavior when a child is upset by something. And then, it's just keeping kids nonverbal by responding to those behaviors, those sensory behaviors. So I see that a few more people are joining me. Thank you so much for joining this live today and sharing with this information. So those are the ways that you can know if your child's sensory behavior is actually a problem. And then moving on from there, I'm going to give you a couple guidelines in selecting your replacement behavior. So first of all, if it's a communication, because if you've determined with your intuition that this sensory behavior is a communication with you and it's nonverbal, then the first step is obviously to mold that into language. And any kind of nonverbal communication sensory behavior is going to be something that you're going to want to mold into language. And then the other thing is, if it is a self-soothing behavior, that internal kind of communication behavior to regulate, to tolerate, to exist in the world, to wait, for any of those other reasons that we give kids sensory integration help, the guideline for replacement behaviors, obviously outside of being injurious, safe for other people and themselves, is that behavior should be non-equipment, should be self-serving. So if it can be a twirl a hair, or a squeeze your hand, or jump up and down versus jumping on a trampoline, or something that a child can shake it off, or just a little bit of structured movement, wall push-ups, things like that, anything that a child can use with just themselves and not another device like a fidget spinner or a stress ball. Those things can be very happy or helpful, and make you very happy if you need something to twiddle and take care of. And it also can stop kids from picking at fingernails and hair and clothing and things like that. But if you can keep it to a self-regulating behavior. Now, a good way to replace some of those is breathing, because one mechanism often that people give to children is to chew on something like a necklace or something like that, if they're chewing on their shirt or those kinds of things. But sometimes kids really use that chewing as a regulation, and sometimes breathing exercises can replace those chewing exercises by using abdominal muscles, and also you can get that tight feeling by other things like squeezing your hands and unsqueezing them, and squinting your eyes and unsquinting them, to experience those same feelings that you would feel in your mouth. That's why when you ask yourself your questions about what does my child's body feel by that behavior, when you're choosing a replacement, behavior, if those things aren't safe or acceptable for you, then choose something that a child can intrinsically use, like breathing or wall push-ups or movement that, they can safely do on their own. So that's the main issues that I wanted to talk to you about today, about sensory integration and why it's so important that sensory integration and your intuition are part of your language facilitation journey with your child. You can't ignore those sensory things, because even if you don't think your child has sensory issues, they're using all of their senses potentially to communicate, both receptively or understanding and expressively. And kids who don't use their verbal language, which isn't even a sense, but it is a way to perceive things for sure, but it is the sound of it. It is the feeling behind the words that you get, which is why the intuitive goes with the language. And it's the feeling behind the sensory behaviors that your child is using that are motivating them to use those behaviors in the first place. So when you use your intuition as a whole, as a language facilitator parent, and use your intuition to evaluate and constantly examine and modify your interaction with your child based on that intuition, you're always going to be successful as a language facilitation parent. And that's what I do. That's how I use my intuition with the families that I work with my waves of intuition, waves of communication, which intuition is a wave of communication. I mean, that's where it comes from. It's all about using your energy and understanding your child's energy and all of that stuff to connect with your child and understand them at the core level of their being and help modify those communication behaviors into real language, real words that your child can use to communicate with everyone else. And I help parents understand how to use their own intuition. That's what's unique about this Waves of Communication program. It's not just the strategies that you see like here in these 30-day videos. These are things that are important for you to always be doing when you communicate with your child. But what I can help you do is actually use your intuition together with mine to evaluate your child's core reasons for not communicating and address those things at a fundamental level so that you can transform all of those behaviors into the verbal language that you want to see and hear and feel and experience yourself with your child. So if you want to work with me and know how to use your intuition with your child and get a very highly specific, highly structured language facilitation plan, please reach out to me via private message. You can contact me on my website, wavesofcommunication.com, and I have a free class there for parents to show you why parents are the best language facilitators for your kids and how you can get started to work with me with a free language facilitation strategy session. And all of that's on my website. The links will also be in the description right after I go live. And so if you're viewing me on YouTube or Facebook, thank you. Thank you again for joining me today for this video. And I think that Christine's here talking about the intangibles. It's really important for you to be able to help your child learn how to use the words they need to share all their wisdom with the whole world, because your kid's here to help teach us all. And I want to help you tap into that and get to them. So until tomorrow with my next episode of my 30-day language facilitation challenge, I will see you next time, and happy language facilitation, you guys. Have a great evening.